So, dear Professor Trochev, Professor Shenk, it's a great pleasure for us to meet you to our podcast. We're especially excited to meet you to the first episode of our newly introduced rubric called Foreign Affairs or Foreign View, which covers the international developments and their implication for Kazakhstan. Let me explain how it works. So basically, it covers the international perspective of knowledgeable people with expertise in a subject area and how they share their view on things, on influence of the foreign developments, international developments on Kazakhstan. And here you are the first guest.
Thanks for having us.
Salam.
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 Well, welcome. Yes, and I saw, and as a member of a new alumni association, I'm happy to kind of continue our series of podcasts. Yeah, and again, as a former student of you, it's great to kind of continue to learning from you and others, from ourselves.
Sure. But as the first episode of our Foreign Affairs rubric, our most important thing that we would like to discuss, the first subject that we want to talk about, is the current Russian-Ukrainian conflict and its implications for Kazakhstan. As I've already mentioned, a lot has been said about the implications of the conflict for Europe, obviously Ukraine and Russia, and even the US, on the other side of the pond, but not so much has been said about its implications for Kazakhstan. And even if it was mostly discussed by domestic experts. So it's a great pleasure to meet you and have you demonstrating your foreign international perspective on what's going on in Kazakhstan. So what do you think is actually going on right now? Let's start very broadly.
Sure. Well, I would say that my perspective is a little bit internal, external, right? Because I've lived here in Kazakhstan for 11 years, and I've been watching events unfold here in Kazakhstan. So I think that colors my perspective, right? So I am definitely an international person, but I also have an internal perspective as well, friends here and things like that. So I would say that one thing that's really important is that kind of the collective trauma. I think that Kazakhstanis feel the Ukraine war as a collective trauma, and that's because it happened right on the heels of the January events, which was also a collective trauma, right? So you have COVID, and then you have the January events, and then you have the Ukraine war, and all of this really, I think, made the war very emotionally kind of close to Kazakhstani people. And so I think, at least judging from my friends in the community that are not connected to the university, and also from the students, I think there was a very immediate response that, wow, this is so existential, right? This is life and death, and this could happen here in Kazakhstan. It could happen to any of us. And what are we going to do about it, right? How do we wrestle with our humanity as a result of, a country that is also our neighbor invading another country in a very violent and egregious sort of way? So I think that the response was immediately emotional, existential, and one of solidarity. Not uniformly, of course, but I think at least among the people that I'm close to, there was this immediate kind of outpouring of support for Ukraine and understanding that this is a really important historical moment.
Yeah, indeed. And the paradox that I noticed is, on the one hand, I see that the current conflict actually, it's consolidated the Kazakhstani society on the one hand, but on the other hand, I see that Kazakhstani society has never been as divided as it is now. So don't you see, how is it possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that, so it's true that, among most, I would say the majority of my circles, there was solidarity to Ukraine. But we also have friends that were on the other side and that were, that are clearly watching Russian media, that are sympathetic to the Russian aims and things like that. And it's been really difficult to have conversations with those people, right? Because you say, oh, how about what's going on in Ukraine? And they tell you all of what's on Pirvikhanal. And these are really hard because we're kind of negotiating these things relationally, right? We're negotiating these conversations with people that we care about, but at the same time, these are really big, important issues that it's hard not to take a stand on. So my son is 13, and he was walking down the street the other day with his backpack with a Ukrainian flag on the back, because this is how we are. And some kids were making fun of him. They were like, "Oh, my za Putina," and all of these sorts of things. And it was Slava Rosi, and it was strange, right? And so he was with my husband, and they were like, "What's going on?" And these were kids his own age, very likely repeating the things that are talked around the dinner table at their homes. So you do see that, expressiveness towards, supporting Russia, but also this expressions of solidarity with Ukraine. And it does occasionally kind of erupt into these very uncomfortable moments. Luckily, nothing really violent yet, but I don't know, it seems kind of scary.
Yeah.
I think all these events and processes, they're taking place as Kazakhstani society is changing, and it's changing rapidly. So I think this is why, so when there is a society is changing, plus we have these external shocks, like pandemic, and then the January events, and then the current conflict that we are discussing. These external shocks, when they, again, some of them would help to consolidate society, or certain groups in society that were not, let's say, that were indifferent to each other before, yeah, and other groups would be opposed to them and consolidating. And so, one option is to have a wall or barrier. So when two sides, let's say there are two sides, there may be more sides, but when each side does not talk to each other. So there's one possible scenario, and I think it's a very dangerous scenario. And the other option is to keep discussing and debating, in a peaceful way. And I think in this process, it would be a lot of learning on both sides, and critical thinking, something that we talk about at our university a lot. And I think through this learning, one side will see that the peaceful, peaceful life is much better than hateful life. And so this would, I think, help civil society to mature and to grow, and to provide some kind of antidote or cure against, hate and xenophobia that could be directed to other groups or to other minorities, unpopular minorities, and so forth. So I think what we are living now is what we are observing now and experiencing now is all about this very rapid change that that society goes through. And of course, external forces can interfere in this process, and ultimately it will be up to people, ordinary people and societies, to prevent or to block it or to reject it. Because elites, as we see, all these three shocks or traumas, they clearly show that there is a big divide between the elites and society, between elites and ordinary people. And so I think that somehow in this process, if elites will learn about accountability to social needs, and we see some signals that this is happening and some signals that it's not happening, then we could say that, that Kazakhstan has an ability or perspective, yeah, because we can't simply say alga if we don't have a sense of direction. And I think these three big shocks, they they sharpen this recognition, realization that, ordinary people will have to decide.
Yeah. This brings up a really important issue. So you say the word accountability, and we were just talking about this in my class this morning, that accountability we often translate as подотчетность, right? Which have very different connotations, right? Accountability is a very relational sort of concept in English, whereas подотчетность is this very sort of auditing sort of mentality. It's a very hierarchical type of concept. And if that's the type of accountability that we're producing, well, there's going to be barriers like going up and down, right? But if we have this sort of relational type of accountability sort of mentality, that's very different, because I think that it relies more on these very sort of banal conversations that we have with people. Like, how are we going to relate to the people around us? Are we going to, if we're challenged, are we going to aggressively kind of defend our position? Or are we going to use that as an opportunity to say, okay, I'm interested in your perspective, right? I, maybe have a Kazakhstani and a Ukrainian flag on my backpack. If somebody aggressively says to me, I don't agree that this is not a good thing or whatever, what's my response going to be? Am I going to say, well, I have the right to my opinion and therefore you can have yours and go away? Or like, engage in a conversation about why you feel the way that you do, or, how are we going to choose to relate to the people around us? And I think that is the level of kind of solidarity that we can have even across different opinions. It's a starting place, right? So I think that this is one, it's a hard work that has to happen at a very sort of interpersonal level.
Sure, you're raising an interesting idea here. So it generally looks very peaceful that people can discuss and talk about different topics and stay calm. But don't you think here, currently, considering the conflict, we're talking about a different thing, like the war is not really that people can stay calm about. So is it possible to stay calm and discuss a war?
It's a great question. And I think, one of the impulses that my students had when the war started was to try to contact their family members in Russia and kind of tell them the truth, right? But they very quickly got kind of burnt out on this, right? Because those conversations were really hard. And I do think that the conversations are really emotional. I was in the park not too long ago with my husband and my daughter, and we were just sitting there, and this guy started talking to us, and we were speaking in Russian, and he was like, well, you're speaking in Russian, you should be speaking in Kazakh. If you are speaking in Russian, you're za Putina, and like you cannot possibly support Ukraine if you're speaking in Russian to me. And I said, well, I want to connect with you. I want to hear your story, and I only speak Russian. I'm really sorry, I don't speak Kazakh. And can we agree that for the moment we can speak in Russian? No, you're for Putin. And so I do think that these are emotional issues, and I think especially the people that are willing to talk about them do get emotional. And so I think it's really hard. It's really hard work. Yeah. It's hard work for me too, because I get really emotional about these issues too. So it's hard.
I think it's a special burden for those native Russian speakers living those living in Kazakhstan, especially those who do not share the Kremlin's perspective on what's going on in Ukraine, who do not support the conflict but still can only speak Russian. So what sides do they choose in that case? They have nothing to do. And I think that you might have noted there are those battles occurring in social media now, especially between Ukrainians and Russians, that saying that those Russians living in Russia supporting Ukraine's but being rejected by Ukrainians, saying that no, you are bearing a collective blame for this, just because you live in Russia, just because you speak Russian,
because you pay taxes, because you haven't personally thrown Putin out of office yourself, you bear complicity. Yeah, I've heard these arguments as well.
Yeah.
And Professor Trochev, you being from Russia originally, could you share your perspective on that?
Well, most Russians, they They get information from TV, even though it's declining, the share of population. And at this point in time, most of them do not feel the impact of this war. So they consume news, but when it, you know, when there are efforts to recruit people to go to the front line, they refuse to even talk about it. So yes, you know, it's like in that TV show Nasha Russia. Yeah? There is this person, Slepakov, who just watches TV and criticizes and criticizes and ridicules, and but when it comes to actual action, it's a very, very pragmatic and down-to-earth person. So I would say that unlike for Ukrainians, majority of Russians do not feel yet the impact of sanctions. I mean, they are used to rising prices or shortage of certain goods or medicines, and but they do not feel this impact. So for them, it's still a TV. For many of them, it's still an entertainment actually, because they watch all these propaganda shows or fake videos from the front lines and so forth. So this would be at this point in time. At this point in time, my assessment of how ordinary people see.
Don't you agree that saying that most Russians actually get their information from TV is a bit of an abstract term, because we know that those Russians those people that you're referring to saying that you're saying get their information from TV actually upgraded as well, and now getting their information from specific Telegram channels, but just being very specific about the channels, being very specific about the Facebook groups that they get information from.
No, that's true. I mean, the audience of Telegram, went up after the Russian authorities banned Instagram. Lots of people went to Telegram, and so yes, but a lot of social media materials actually borrowed from original stories written by journalists for newspapers or TV or magazines. Mm-hmm. If you look, and then there is a discussion or hype or whatever. There's like afterlife after that for this. So, but in both, in social media or TV, there is a lot of propaganda. Yeah,
sure.
Just like in Kazakhstan. So, so in that sense, it's very. You could see that it's very effective. You could see, yeah.
And comparing the propaganda, I remember in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, turning on the Russian TV just to kind of see what was going on, see how they were framing events, and half the time I would turn the TV on and it would be some movie like World War II movie. Now you turn Russian TV on and it is the constant barrage of like really crazy propaganda, like really, really intense propaganda about genocide from the West and all of like really, really extreme views that weren't represented in 2014, and the volume and the intensity was just nothing in comparison. So it's really, really ramped it up to an amazing degree.
So it's like to continue this topic. I think, yes, this is about the information bubble every person lives in, yes? So as you said that Kazakhstan society is divided, but also consolidated, and also kind of, for example, in my environment, I also see people who kind of consume all this pro-European, pro-Ukrainian content, and I see that they are against Russia strictly. They don't speak to people who kind of even not support, just they kind of look at Russia as previously, like before war period. So, and half of my audience, some of the active social media users, they say the war is obviously is bad. Yeah, it's terrible, but also we see that the media is so kind of westernized, yes, biased to kind of to the west, so that all other wars that were going on, for example, in Middle East, in Asia, in other different parts of the world, they were kind of forgotten, or maybe they were like behind the scenes, and now we only see this kind of Europe against the world against Russia kind of war and everything. So for me, this time, I mean, this kind of half a year from February, 7-8 months, it was difficult to every time to kind of choose the side, because I know so many Russian people in my information bubble who are against this regime, Russian regime, Kremlin regime, against Putin. I know so many active Russian citizens who support Ukrainians from their side. Kind of, they donate something. They go to this Ukrainian embassy to help, and they even left, for example, Russia in February, March, this period. So here, this kind of the world we now live, the events that we have now, is so kind of complex, and people are so divided, and the reaction could be so different, so that I think it is okay to discuss the war, but also we need to kind of probably do not forget that the war and the violence in general was always bad, yes, and the conflicts that are now in our agenda is mostly dictated by the media. Yes, so and of course we as a Kazakhstani citizen, I was waiting like for the official, for example, statement of our government, of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and when recently we had this kind of not so strong, but at least a position that we do not support this independence of this quasi governmental areas of Donetsk, Lugansk, and something. I see that at least in Kazakhstan, like there is a political will, yes, to support international law, to kind of protect human rights in general,
to be committed to
be committed to this, yes, collective fight against war and violence in general. But among people inside, we have this certain exceptions, as you said, when people kind of share their opinions.
Bullying for the flag.
Bullying for the flag or something. But I know I'm lucky to have this kind of people that are only adequate. They really understand. In general, they think that war is bad, and we need to kind of help anyone who are now suffering. At least, what can we do? We kind of continue to live, and at least share our position, and somehow support.
A
couple of times I went to Ukrainian embassies. To kind of collect, to do something. Because it was easy and strange to me, for example, to share opinions, to discuss, but these talks rarely go to some. We are not decision makers in general, so we cannot somehow influence this kind of situation between Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine. But from as a human being, doing something, raising information campaigns, repost something and go donate and help. I think this was, and I see lots of our local people who are doing it. So that's why so far within this kind of difficult times, I see like many people kind of came, take themselves together, and kind of they, in general, majority of people, they support kind of peace and help those who are not suffering, and I see it. And as you said, this kind of threat now kind of raised our national identity. I mean, they strengthened our national identity. As you said, there are some people who now are learning Kazakh language because they see that just knowing Russian language, you will immediately associate yourself with Russia, with aggressor, and it's kind of the whole new layer of of discourse and of agenda.
What's interesting about that is that those conversations have been going on for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, should we be moving more towards Kazakh language, away from Russian language? And these topics have been really contentious for years, right? But now they have this new layer of sort of passion, and I really hope, I think there's an opportunity to kind of use Kazakh language as a sort of international solidarity, right? Like that Kazakh language is available to the Russian population of Kazakhstan, and Kazakh language is something that foreigners can, learn, and all of these. That's an opportunity, right? But I do also see that I think that in some ways, when we talk about kind of anti-imperial movements or post-colonial movements, sometimes the only language that we have to put, there is a nationalist language. And I'm just not sure that like anti-Russian Kazakh nationalist kind of dichotomy is the right way to say, like, it's got to be either or, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if we can kind of think about Kazakh identity or Kazakh language as a sort of inclusive way of, going forward in a way that kind of builds some identity away from the Russian world, then that seems positive, right? If it ends up being like a sort of exclusive, Kazakh ethnic nationalist, well, that makes me a little bit nervous. I don't know, maybe because we have connotations about ethnic nationalism that tends to be a bit orientalized or something. But this is something that I think about a lot. Like, is the upcoming national identity going to be an inclusive one? Is it going to be an exclusive one? And I think that is a big question that society needs to contend with.
Do we have a successful experience of inclusivity across the Russian borders after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Which the cases in countries which succeeded in including both Russian-speaking and local-speaking population and creating one civil nation?
I do think up to this point, Kazakhstan's done a really good job of balancing those things. I mean, I think that, my Russian friends that live here, they don't look to Russia for their identity. They're Kazakhstani. And in fact, after the war, I remember having a conversation with one of my friends who's Russian-Ukrainian. And she was like, well, I'm Russian and I'm Ukrainian and I live in Kazakhstan. I don't even know I don't know how to think about myself anymore. But I live in Kazakhstan and this is where I am and I'm not going anywhere, right? So these Russian Kazakhstanis, they aren't Russians, they're Kazakhstani Russians. And I think that I think that this group of people, they can be seen as a sort of success story of inclusive nationalism in some sense.
Yeah. Can we think of, say, Latvia or Lithuania as examples of it?
Well, I mean, the fact of Baltic states, they were inclusive. In other words, there was no massive out migration of ethnic Russians out of these three republics because they knew that somehow they will be
EU.
They will be in EU, yeah. So that's yeah, and then they could go into Europe and so forth. So there was no. But in Kazakhstan, we know, Gennady Golovkin. Yeah, when they asked him some question about Russia, and he said, "Well, ask Russian people about, ask Russian citizens." He's like, "I'm Kazakhstani." He said it's open text. So I think this symbolic type of actions clearly show about that it's possible. It's possible to have inclusive, actually living well in peace, interethnic peace, using several languages in business, at work, at home. I mean, this is all how to say. These are all accomplishments and achievements, and they show that they give an example that you can have a good life in a good society, despite all these differences, religious, ethnic, linguistic, and so forth. So that's, I think this is the example that Kazakhstan can give to Russia, for example. Yeah? Because we had many, well, in the news there were examples that, about racism and xenophobia growing recently in Russia. Yeah, that non-Russian people, non-ethnic Russians who moved to Russia, they did not expect. Even people who fled Donetsk, Luhansk, went to Russia. They felt
Slavic people, right?
Yes, they felt discrimination. So in this regard, I think this example, we can build a nation by trying to look like some other nation, or we can build a nation also by saying that no, we are not like that nation. It's possible. Yeah? Like Canadians, for example, identify themselves as not US, but what is and so I think these processes, these tracks, they happen simultaneously, and I think now we are seeing this. When we talk about consolidation, we see that we don't want to be, well, many people say we don't want to be like that, yeah, and so that's a natural process. I don't think it can be stopped. And demographic change in Kazakhstan is that more and more people are born and they use Kazakh language. So it's a matter of, I don't know, one generation.
Yeah, I do think that there's a generational aspect. And then there's a kind of an adult population aspect. I was speaking to one of my friends who's kind of an expat from Russia, but just works here in the community. And he was saying, well, I would love to learn Kazakh, but I'm old, right? I just don't have the ability. Like, I would love to learn Chinese, but I just can't do it. But there's this cool kind of network of Kazakh language clubs down in Almaty started by this guy Aleksey Trochev or something like this. Yeah, and it's a cool example of ethnic Russians who are promoting the use of Kazakh language in a fun way. And I think that is a great example of how we can kind of build interethnic sort of solidarity in a productive way, right? Just to say that Kazakh language is not something that you should do because you're Kazakh, right? Which is, I think, how a lot of people feel. It's something that we can do together. And even as adults, it's something that we can do together to demonstrate a level of solidarity within the country in a way that's positive. So I really would like to see more of those efforts kind of take off because I do think that that represents a really positive future.
We have those schools here.
Yeah, so I personally, with my fellows, we do every Sunday we have this speaking club, Kazakh speaking club, Tildes, Maksat and Sultan Salim. We saw this trend of so many people desiring to learn Kazakh language, and we kind of just experimented. For example. Almost kind of 3-4 months, we have this constant growing number of people joining our kind of chat, our club. And when we do it online, for example, 3 times a week, some people even pay for it. Yeah, for our time, for organization. And we have so many people from various regions. And they are not only foreigners, I mean, not only ethnic Russians or Ukrainians or Koreans, but our very own Kazakhs, Kazakh people who somehow, due to different reasons, they do not kind of speak Kazakh. But we see that the solution for this, as we are talking now, it's to promote and to create this friendly environment of bilinguals. Yeah. For example, I personally and other my friends, we know Kazakh and Russian, and we organize these speaking clubs in friendly environment so that people feel free to speak, and they are not they don't feel shame, and we don't say them that your pronunciation is bad, or you are Kazakh, how can you don't learn it in like 20 years or 30 years. Yeah, so it's bad. And we for ourselves, we strongly believe that just encouraging people to speak and to know 2 languages, both languages, Kazakh and Russian, in kind of relatively,
and English possibly, yeah.
Yeah, and very good. Yeah, trilingual policy would be very great for Kazakhstan. But for in general, the vast majority of people, if they know Kazakh and Russian, like most of people, they because they consume Russian content, yes, in media. But we usually do not kind of speak, for example, Kazakh. Mostly Russian-speaking population, they don't just speak Kazakh because they don't see the environment, they don't see the necessity. If at the workplace the working language is Russian, and if, for example, documentation is in Russian, we just don't create this kind of how is it? Medium environment. Yeah. So we see that. However, with the rise of this, national,
bottom-up
process, yes. When we see with many people, generationally, yes, they are born in this independent Kazakh, they know their own Kazakh language, and so many content and information now is provided in Kazakh, especially in entertainment, but the rest. For example, from the state level, now it's obligatory, for example, to provide services in both languages, especially in a language customer, demands. So from this case, we see that this is a very difficult, complex process, but it should be done collectively, yes, not only bottom-up, but also top-down. Also, government also need. It creates, it supports, but on paper, many things are done in 2 languages, but implementation should be
done both ways.
Should be done both ways, yes. And also, many people also should demand, for example, in Kazakh, and be friendly to teach Kazakh and to create this friendly environment for those who are willing to learn Kazakh. And as you said. For example, in Astana, we have this kind of community of freelancers, of people who see that the necessity of knowing Kazakh is rising, and also by knowing Kazakh, you kind of create yourself more opportunities to earn money, to make new friends from different regions. So, and if you see and show other people that knowing Kazakh is creating new doors for you, now people can understand that it's not bad to know Kazakh when you are in Kazakhstan, basically. And
Yeah, I remember when, maybe like 8 years ago or something, they were changing some signs from Russian to Kazakh, and at the time I felt really marginalized. Like as a Russian speaker, I thought, oh well, there's decreasing space for me in Kazakhstani society. But now I am feeling like there's parts of Kazakhstani society that I want to access. That's Kazakh language speaking. This is a totally different feeling, right? Feeling marginalized versus feeling like there's something I want, but I need to cross the line in order to learn Kazakh to access that part of society. It's a totally different mentality, right? And I think I think it's a positive move.
Yeah, and also society, yes, is changing, and people's attitudes to things are changing. I know in 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, for example, I'm a graduate of Russian-speaking school, Russian school. My teachers were mostly Russian-speaking, and I was kind of my knowledge of Kazakh and language proficiency in Kazakh is mostly from my family and my friends. But kind of when I entered Nazarbayev University, for example, I saw this kind of my desire was kind of how come I, as a citizen, I do not level of my native language is low, and probably I'm forgetting it. So that's why I talked to our professors from Kazakh department, and they said, yeah, it's kind of we are Kazakh people, we Kazakhstani people, and this is our kind of priceless culture, priceless non-material let's say amanat or mura, yes, like legacy of our ancestors.
Yeah.
And if we do not learn it, and if we do not pass it to one another and to other generations, who will make it?
To our descendants as well.
Yeah, and not Russia, I guess. Not Russia. Russia is not interested to create and develop all these local Central Asian languages, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great difference between, as you mentioned earlier, the Kazakh language and English language, which is with the latter being more inclusive, I guess. Because, no matter how bad, like how pathetic you speak English, you will always be accepted to whatever community there is. Because, you can speak like millions of accents and you always be accepted as just another English speaker. Unlike Kazakh, which mostly has one accent with certain deviations in this, say, in southern accents, eastern accents, the western accents, but mostly you're supposed to be to speak in a certain uniform way, unlike English. And I guess that's the thing, that's the barriers that prevents many of us, many of people in Kazakhstan, including ethnic Russians and Slavic people and other people as well, from embracing themselves and starting learning Kazakh, because unfortunately Kazakh language is not as integrative, as inclusive as English.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but people's reaction can change, yes?
Right.
And generations should
and we should change
them.
our reaction, the attitude of our society, of us, to things that's happening. There should be no shaming, no bullying, just more inclusivity. I guess people in the US, especially big cities like New York, they no longer care, right, what accent you speak. They just don't care.
As long as they understand it.
What's interesting, though, is, Kazakhs really pride themselves on being, like, hospitable, right? Like, this is a part of Kazakh culture, right? But at the same time, like, you see these sort of, I wouldn't say xenophobic, but a little bit of fear, right? Of, well, there's definitely Chinese fear. There's fear of immigrants coming down from Russia. There is this sort of fear of the other in some ways. I think that maybe if we think of this as an opportunity for hospitality rather than a threat to our identity, this could be a way of thinking of it in a positive light. That, like, okay, there's more Russians coming since the war, but we can demonstrate how great Kazakh hospitality is, rather than feeling nervous about people taking our jobs. But
Yeah,
I actually think that this is a sort of migration that we've never seen before, right? Where the former colonizer comes to the colony for refuge in times of trouble. This theoretically in the migration literature does not exist. Like, I don't know of any other examples of where the colonizers
The
later
reverse
on-
thing, yeah?
Yeah, it's a reverse sort
I
of
do,
thing.
though. I do.
Okay.
Yeah, because, I've mentioned this a couple of times before. To me, it was a bit of like an interesting case because we all know that Russia was a colonizer here in the Central Asia, but we tend to compare Russian colonization of Central Asia with, say, colonization that happened in North America by the British Empire.
Right.
But we often miss in one thing here is that British and the Native Americans never interacted before the colonization started after they discovered America. But we often forget that before Russians came to Central Asia came to Russia before, like during the Genghis Khan times, during the Golden Horde. And now, as you see, that they came to Moscow, then Moscow came to them,
Good point.
and now the whole thing collapsed relatively peacefully. It's keeping disintegrating, and now we see that again. We see this migration from the former colonizer to the colony, as you say. So it's a really authentic case that we observing here.
There's that these paths of migration like are historically going back and forth. Yeah, this is a great point. And I mean, maybe the flaw of migration theory is that we haven't reached back into historically enough to kind of think about population movements and empire in maybe cyclical types of fashions. But I do think that there's an opportunity, right, in the current moment to interrogate our theory and in this way, exactly. So I think that's really interesting. There's a great opportunity.
And do you think, I know that may sound odd, but there is more of an opportunity from the current migration happening from Russia, or more of a challenge for us? And how do we reconcile, what we discussed before, that this rebirth of national identity first, and the fact that the current Kazakhstani society is pretty divided now, and with the migration from Russia, which is currently in conflict with Ukraine. And how do we reconcile all the three things together? How do we get the best of most of it and see?
I don't think it's any one way, right? Like, I think all of these things are happening simultaneously, and it's really messy, right? So you do have these sort of impulses that we have negative impulses and you have positive impulses. And are they always necessarily in exact kind of conflict? Not necessarily, right? They're just kind of existing together. So there definitely are opportunities and positive aspects. I mean, I do think that the people that are leaving Russia are not like the Putin supporters, right? That are like pro-war, right? So that's like there's a self-selection process of the people that either have the means to leave or that ideologically they just don't want to be a part of Russian society anymore. And I mean, so there can be positives, right? Like economic opportunity, economic inputs, societal impact societal inputs that are not pro-Russian, that are probably willing to contribute to whatever society they land in, right? Because they're just so desperate to get away from Russia. So those things are positives, but certainly there's the negatives too. And we're human, right? These are always going to exist. I don't think that we can completely eliminate these human aspects of living together, right? So, to try to say, well, let's mitigate these negative aspects. I don't think we can eliminate them, but maybe engaging them in a way that makes people feel enfranchised, right? Makes people feel, so if people are nervous about, in a nationalist sort of way, like Russians are taking over, what is it that they're really nervous about? Maybe we can have open conversations about those things that would kind of mitigate some of the anxiety, would be a way to kind of move forward in a more productive way. But I think you can never eliminate all of the potential negatives, unfortunately, just because we're human.
For sure.
Yeah, I think we are talking about the tolerance, as a social value. So trust in strangers and tolerating certain behaviors. So I think as society is changing, there are more chances for people to speak in public spaces. And so inevitably when you expand freedom of speech, inevitably you will have someone who will say something radical or provocative or unacceptable. Yeah, it's so I think by now society is prepared for that, and it has it's already developed from January, and for 6 months since the war began, I think society has developed some kind of antidote or protection against this. So and government is helping. Yeah, they impose penalties on drivers or car owners who display signs with last letter of Latin alphabet. Yeah? Even though before February, if somebody put this letter on the car, people would not notice it or would not care about it. Now people notice it, they inform police goes, removes it and penalizes. So we actually have here synergy or cooperation between ordinary people and government officials. That this is a wrong behavior, unacceptable behavior.
Though I have heard cases where they've also asked people to take Ukrainian flags down. So, there is a sort of if you have a connection to the government and you want to complain about this Ukrainian flag that's hanging up in your neighborhood, and you can get the government to listen to you and the police will go make those people take it down, that happens also, right? So,
it's still less penalty. Yeah. There's yeah. But
so, I guess that's one point that we can take out of that is that the opinion is not uniform, right? And that speaking out is still being negotiated in Kazakhstan. But I do think that there's more space than there has been before. You see it on the, in the protests that are allowed, they're allowing more protests than they ever did before. Though, that's just one way of having political voice. I don't think we should overemphasize that. Social media space is huge, and just the conversations that people are having, I think, have taken a different direction than they had 5-10 years ago in Kazakhstan. They're just different, right? With whether it's because of COVID, because of January, because of Ukraine, these have all kind of opened up spaces where people feel like they have a responsibility to their society in ways that they didn't feel like they had before. And that's really interesting.
Should we, do you think, follow the examples of, say, again, Germany, Latvia, or some other countries of the European Union, which bans the symbols of the conflict, saying that supporters, and which say, for example, as you said, last letter of the Latin alphabet?
Well, it's banned here. De facto, it's banned.
Yeah, still we don't have a law which specifically prohibits the exhibition of the sign. Oftentimes it's just for people are persecuted for violation of some traffic rules or some other stuff, but there is no specific law compared to those that they have in Latvia or Germany, which specifically says you can support the conflict. Should we have something like this here? Or should we stay as much neutral as we are?
Well, Kazakhstan's really good at being neutral.
Multi-vectoralism.
Multi-vectorism. Yeah.
I don't know. If you don't have to legislate something, maybe don't legislate it, right? Why over-legislate? It's symbolic. It becomes purely symbolic if you legislate something that you don't actually need to legislate. If de facto they're kind of making sure that those things are not acceptable in society, do you need that further symbolic level of legislation in order to say, what would sort of message would this send? The message to the population, the message to Russia, the message to the outside world. It's, I think that the Kazakhstani government is very careful because they know that everything that they do has multiple audiences, right? And therefore they kind of err on the side of caution, sometimes inactivity, because they know that they have 3 very different constituencies that are watching them very closely. So I mean, I don't know what do you do? I wouldn't want to be I wouldn't want to be in the Kazakhstani government because it's really hard to try to accomplish all of those goals at the same time.
On the other hand, Kazakhstani government is very skillful in banning things. So I don't know if banning it would produce desired effect. I would say. Yeah? I think the statement by president and then these police actions and people's solidarity at the concerts, at volunteering, at donating, I think it's much more effective, in my opinion, than some government action that we do not know how it can be used later.
Sure, but how long will it last? That's the question. Like, sure, it might be effective at this stage right now. It might be effective for some time in the future. But will this trend continue through years?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so much uncertainty right now, and that's one of the things that I think that the last couple of years have demonstrated to us, just that we're living in a world of uncertainty that we thought we had control over things until the pandemic, and then the January events, and then Ukraine, and we realize now how little power we have over the world and our circumstances, right? And so I think kind of reckoning with uncertainty is something that has been a big lesson in the past months and years. And because of that, for me, it's really hard to make any sort of predictions or prognostications that, you can kind of elaborate scenarios. Okay, if the war ends today, then we can kind of start down the road of, healing and rebuilding and all of these sorts of things. If the war goes on for 10 years, the world is going to look really different. One thing that would be really tragic, I think, is if we missed the opportunity to learn the lessons that are right there in front of us, right? So I wouldn't say it's a benefit of the war, because obviously it's not worth the tragedy of lost life. But, one thing that we should we should definitely not lose the opportunity to reconsider the relationship with Russia. And the longer the war goes on, the more people, I think, will have that right there in their face. If the war ends and things go back to normal, I'm afraid that that will be a lost opportunity. Again, it's not worth the loss of life. I would never say that I would want the war to continue because of that, but I do hope that people feel a sense of urgency to learn the lessons that are available to them.
But it would be new normal.
Yeah,
it would be it would not
different
be normal.
normal.
Yeah.
And this is one aspect. There's many Russians who come to Kazakhstan now. They hope that it will be over soon and everything will be back to normal. But first of all, it won't be back to normal, and second of all, we do not know how long this will last. So this will also affect this migration, acceptance in society and adaptation or integration within. So, and I just wanted to say that our students, we train them how to ask sharp questions.
I also say to students, if you have more questions at the end of a conversation than you had at the beginning of the conversation, then that means you're going in the right direction, right? So we don't solve the world's problems. We ask questions, and that is what opens up conversation. And so thank you very much for having us for this conversation.
Yeah, I wish we could speak a bit longer, but that was a great productive discussion. I really missed some of those intellectual talks.
Yeah.
You can come over for dinner. This is how we train our kids.
Much food for
We'll do.
thought.
Yeah.
And also, yes, let's say that we need to make peace, yes, not war.
Absolutely.
And I hope we don't need this to think about this, worst case scenarios, because we want to live, we want to strive.
And we want to hope that Kazakhstan will be able to get most of the current situation. As cynical as it may sound.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Rahmet.
Kob rahmet. Yeah.